incoming class this year, they would want you to meet the MCAT and grade point average scores and have medically related experiences and all of those things. Having a really good full application will help. Then the admissions committee votes on it, and it's just a simple majority, and they go through. We had 8 people interview this year for early decision. We had 17 people apply. So it's very competitive. But currently, the admissions committee is thinking about exactly what they want to do with that program, so I'm not really sure where they're going with it yet. But it is something that we've had for many, many years. It is not just for Iowans. It's open to non-residents as well. So if that's something that interests you, you're certainly welcome to come in and talk to us about it and see what the advantages and disadvantages specifically for you might be.
If you go with early decision, do the other schools you apply to know that you did early decision at Iowa, and would they maybe not look at you as much if they think that you might go there?
No. Medical schools typically don't look at the other places that you've applied. We don't look at that until March, when decisions have been made, and we can get into the AMCAS system and see where else you've been admitted. We do that after we've admitted the class, so it isn't going to affect your admissions one way or another. It just helps us to know if you're admitted to 6 or 7 other places, how hard we have to work. So that's important for you to know as well. We don't look at those things ahead of time. We don't make decisions about you, although private schools can if they want to.
I was wondering if you could talk about the actual interview process and maybe what you're doing.
How to prepare. I was an academic advisor many, many, many years ago. And when I was an academic advisor, the College of Medicine did not have interviews. So pretty much they were admitting people based on their academics alone. And they found that perhaps they weren't getting the most social people. And so they decided to institute an interview. At the time, though, they wanted it to be useful. They wanted the information that got to the admissions committee to be something they could compare applicants on, that it was fair to all of the applicants, and that they asked questions that the admissions committee wanted answers to. So they created something called a structured interview. And when I switched over from the advising center to the College of Medicine to start that interview process, I was told how the interview would go. And they had 9 or 11, I can't remember, structured questions. And the applicants would go into the room with 2 faculty members, and the faculty members would ask them a question, and the applicant would answer them, and they'd nod and take notes. And then they go on to the next question. This would go on for about 45 minutes. And so it was just, you just presented your answers, basically. So at the end of that year, I said, I can't recruit like this, so we're going to have to do something different. So they knocked it down to 9 questions, then the next year to 7, the next year to 5, and I've got them down to 3 now. So it took me 13 years to get them down to 3 questions. But it's still something that we have researched, and we feel very, very comfortable that the combination of structure and unstructured portions of a 25-minute interview really are giving us information that we can't find in your application necessarily. So we have about 125 to 150 faculty members who do the interview process for us. They are not on the admissions committee. These are people who volunteer their time to interview, which means they want to be there. And that's important. They have no access whatsoever to your application, and all they know is what you majored in, where you went to school, and whether you're a resident or a non-resident. So those are all the pieces of information you give them, and that's all they get ever. So when you come in now into the interview room, they introduce themselves, and they tell you who they are, where they work, and how they interact with medical students. So that gives you kind of an idea of who to ask certain questions. If one of them happens to be teacher, or another one is a clinical director, then you kind of have a way to focus your questions. Then they'll ask you to tell them something about yourself. That is not the time to tell them why you want to be a doctor, because I'm sure they're going to ask you that. So just tell them something about yourself. It can be very, very simple, and then they're going to go on and say, now we're going to start the structured part of the interview. We're going to ask you 3 questions. They can nod and they can smile, and honestly, they have a sheet of paper in front of them with the word smile on it, this big, in bold print and underlined. So they're not told to be just straight-faced and not give you any feedback. They can lean forward and nod and look at you and smile, but they're not allowed to say, that's really interesting, can you tell me more, or anything like that. So while you're talking, they'll take some notes, because that reminds them of things that you've talked about. And when you finish answering the first question, then they'll go on to the next question. And then they'll do that for the third question. And then they're going to go on and they'll tell you. They'll say, okay, we've got the structured part finished. We're going on to the unstructured part. And that's a regular give and take. You can ask them questions, they can ask you questions. And very often, if there's something they want to know more about that you mentioned earlier, that's when they'll follow up with that. They'll ask you those follow-up questions then. They can ask you additional questions, and they have a list of questions they can't ask you. So we make sure that they stay where they need to stay to give us the information that we want. So at the end of your interview then, it's 25 minutes long, and Stephanie will knock on the door and say, time, and they'll have to release you from the room. It's true, right? So what they do then is write down a paragraph of information about their interaction with you. And that information goes to Stephanie, who knocked on the door. She enters it into the computer, and it goes on to our admissions committee. So no one is going to come to the admissions committee and advocate for you because they met you in the interview. That isn't part of our process. We have a national group of admissions people that meet together. We have a listserv. We talk to each other all the time. And one of those admissions directors did a survey of all the medical schools and found out that only 1/3 of them